Our next speaker, Chine McDonald, is an outstanding commentator and contributor not only to the church, but importantly in the public square. Her recent book, God is Not a White Man, is available at the back, and her most recent book, Unmaking Mary, is also available. Please do have a look at that. Copies are going quickly. Importantly, Chine is director of Theos, which is a public theology think tank, and oversees theological comment on public affairs. Most recently, the election of Pope Leo XIV, the election of Mark Carney as Prime Minister of Canada, for example. And the current project that Theos is running is called Motherhood versus the Machine, Motherhood in an Age of Technology. So we're delighted that Chine's been able to be with us today. Thank you for being with us. Please would you welcome Chine to give her talk on Unmaking Motherhood, Rethinking Race, Gender and Divine Maternal Imagery. Chine McDonald.
Hello everyone, it is really wonderful to be here. This is one of those spaces that I kind of walked into and then kind of exhaled because there are lots of women here, and the things I've already heard from Liz and Bishop Sarah have already kind of stirred in me something new, and also will resonate with some of the things I'm going to talk about. Now, I'm going to be talking about motherhood, and I know that that kind of elicits some views, thoughts, feelings in people. But what I've been trying to say, both with my book and the work that we're doing at Theos on these ideas about motherhood, is that it's not just about motherhood. Motherhood is a lens through which we can explore what it is to be human, where power lies in our society, and the ideas that they exist in the public spaces around women in general. So please hear that as I speak. So I have been a mother for 7.5 years, and these years have been filled with the days and hours and minutes that themselves have been filled with pride, a love that bursts out of my chest, rage, boredom, the feeling of being touched out, hope, fear, anxiety, and grief. And I think I thought that motherhood would be flat, one-dimensional. I thought it would be dull. I also thought I would be good at it. And no one warns you about the constant feelings of inadequacy, the failing at every turn, about the myths of perfect motherhood. Now, in the days and weeks after my first son was born, I felt that the assumptions I had, the assumptions that I had made about what all of it was going to be like, were shattered daily. The breastfeeding, the sleep deprivation, the sheer relentlessness. This isn't to say that it was for me a wholly negative experience or realization. I was shocked too at the force of love that I had for my child. But I felt ill-equipped for motherhood, as if I'd packed for the wrong trip. And every mother I know wrestles with this sense of bewilderment, this sense of maternal inadequacy. And I started to think about what is it about the reality of motherhood that feels so at odds with what we had expected. Where do these expectations come from? I'm convinced that the institution of motherhood, the ideal of motherhood that shapes our expectations of what it is supposed to be, is most vividly displayed in the ways in which Mary, the mother of Jesus, the most famous mother of all, has been constructed throughout art, history, culture, and theology over the centuries. In Mary, we can see the dominant ideals of motherhood that have been projected onto her, and which shape our ideas about maternal in good ways and in bad. Now, most of my motherhood feels a long way away from these kinds of paintings. Quiet, doting, caring mother. A woman with not a hair out of place, skin porcelain white, eyes fixed on her precious child. Now, Mary's image has become the impossible standard for mothers, but also the ideal for all women, because all have fallen short of her glory. The ideas about what it is to be a woman and a mother that infuse our societies have been shaped by what art historian Catherine McCormack describes as an avalanche of Christian devotional images of the Virgin Mary that define mothering as something sacrosanct, monumental, self-sacrificing, subservient, and desexualized. Author Lucy Jones describes how Mary represents the passive receptacle of motherhood ideals. She writes, she is there as a container, a prop, a dummy. Theologian Nicholas Lee writes, it is hardly possible to exist as an inhabitant of the Western world with even half an eye open to the visual and cultural heritage of Christendom and not to have been in some way affected by this woman, the woman of the Christian tradition. Mary, or at least Mary in the versions we've come to understand, is whatever the world wants her to be, or indeed whatever the world wants all women to be. And I wrote Unmaking Mary because I wanted to kind of break cover, to unmake this cloak of perfection that surrounds Mary and shames the rest of us. It's the constructed Mary that I want to unmake and to deconstruct, the one onto whom every idea about the maternal ideal has been projected. I think Mary can empower women, though, if the myths that surround her and perfect motherhood are shattered. So here we are at a conference called Women's Voices, and there is no greater female voice in the Bible than Mary, who sings her song of justice in Luke 2 and speaks of a new world order. But this powerful, magnificat Mary is so often packaged in the perfect maternal ideal that Mary's come to represent. Now, in the book, I highlight a number of myths that need to be deconstructed. The myth that perfect motherhood is always beautiful. We see that in the way that motherhood is represented on our screens or in advertising or in the idyllic lives of tradwives on social media, for example. The myth, too, that perfect motherhood is young. We rarely see examples of older mothers with older children in popular culture. I tackle the myth that perfect motherhood is painless, when both Mary and all mothers experience grief and loss and death, and the myth that perfect motherhood is white. So as I said, most of my motherhood feels very far away from these images. And this image has become the standard for mothers and the ideal for all women. And earlier I mentioned Catherine McCormack, who describes this avalanche of Christian devotional images that define mothering as something sacrosanct, monumental, self-sacrificing, subservient, and desexualized. Now, in that description, we see elements of the presentation of Black motherhood, self-sacrificing and subservient. And we see this most vividly played out in the mammy myth of Black womanhood, which I'm going to be speaking about shortly. But we also see ideas in that quote that we don't see played out in symbolic representations of Black motherhood. In popular culture, the Black mother is the opposite of sacrosanct and the opposite of desexualized. In the tropes of Jezebel or Sapphire, we see hypersexualized and unholy women. And we can chart this back to the focus on Black enslaved women's reproductive abilities during the days of slavery. Black women often faced sexual assault and rape and abuse by their slave owners and were frequently pregnant. Slavery depended on Black women supplying future slaves, and so they were, of course, encouraged to reproduce. The Jim Crow Museum states that slavers may have offered a new pig for each child born to an enslaved family. They may have bought a new dress for a new enslaved mother, as long as her child survived childbirth. Or they may have got to not have to work on Saturdays if they had more than 6 children. Young black girls often had to have sex as anticipatory socialization for their soon-to-be adult status as breeders. There were magazines and periodicals that explained optimal conditions for enslaved women to reproduce. As one ex-slave said, women wasn't nothing but cattle. So here we see some of the negative perceptions that contrast with these kind of very pure descriptions of white motherhood when it comes to black motherhood. And so into these negative perceptions of black motherhood, within a context in which white motherhood is perceived as the ideal, comes the Black Madonna. And here are some examples of Black Madonna imagery. Now, no one quite knows what a Black Madonna is. The terms given to any images, statues, or paintings in which Mary and Jesus are depicted with dark skin. Academics dispute whether they are actually black, as in deliberately designed to depict a woman of colour, whether this blackness is symbolic of some other idea that has nothing to do with race, or indeed whether the blackness of the images and sculptures has any significance at all. It's just accidental, black wood. Whatever they are, there are thought to be at least 450 in Europe, and most of these are found in France. And at various times and places, blackness has been associated with strangeness, death, and evil. But at other times, the colour black has been associated with soil, fertility, and therefore new life. Black Madonnas have long been popular figures in feminist and goddess spiritualities, and some of the greatest black female activists have found themselves at the Black Madonna's feet. So the late Bell Hooks, for example, spoke about the freedom she found in the Black Madonna. Now, when I became a mother, I realised I didn't fit in, I didn't conform to the image of motherhood that I had in my head. Though artistic representations of motherhood and Mary have most often been white, Mary wasn't. The sheer fact is that she was a brown-skinned woman, a Palestinian Jewish woman. There is something powerful for me in reclaiming her in the form of the Black Madonna. For black women who have long felt excluded, the Black Madonna is a profound place of safety and welcome. Black Madonnas are surprising, they're intriguing, because they don't fit in the dominant image that we have of motherhood, in particular white motherhood, in our heads. And their non-conformity makes them also a useful lens through which to look at the ways of mothering that also don't fit the archetype. So adopted mothers, single mothers, older mothers, LGBTQ mothers. For me, the Black Madonna's power is in her literal blackness, but also in her association with the wretched mothers of the earth. And last year, I made a documentary on Radio BBC World Service about Black Madonnas. And so I went to France to encounter my first Black Madonna. And I realised that when I stand in front of a Black Madonna, I connect with experiences that have been integral to Black motherhood. Feelings of solidarity, of care, of safety, and a fierce protectiveness. Black motherhood, however, is a concept within black communities that isn't only confined to people who have given birth. The mothering of black women extends to the mothering that is done by all women. Friends, sisters, aunties, mothers, grandmothers. And this is an idea that is central to womanism, which is a feminist intellectual framework that's championed by black feminists, which which places anti-racism at its heart. And the term comes from Alice Walker's 1983 essay called In Search of Our Mother's Garden, Womanist Prose. And Dolores Williams describes the nature and role of mothering within this framework. And she writes, womanism is characterised by black women, not necessarily bearers of children, nurturing great numbers of black people in the liberation struggle. So people like Harriet Tubman. And in these ideas of womanism, we see how the Black Madonna's alignment with all people, all who are marginalised, whether they are mothers or not, challenges the perfect and restrictive ideal of motherhood that's presented to us in the myth of the ways in which Mary is represented. Now, on to the mummy myth. So last April, just over 6 months before the US presidential elections, and before replacing President Joe Biden as the Democratic nominee, Vice President Kamala Harris was interviewed on actress Drew Barrymore's daytime TV show. Now, during the show, Harris revealed that she got her stepchildren to call her Mama, because she didn't like the portrayals that there are in culture of stepmothers. And as she was describing this to Drew Barrymore, what followed was a very strange response from the host. And it got lots of media attention, and it talked about, it kind of drew out some ideas about the characterization of black motherhood in American culture. So what the context in which this conversation took place was amid a background of economic uncertainty, climate anxiety, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the conflict in Israel and Gaza, and rising political unrest. And Barrymore said to Kamala Harris, "I keep thinking in my head that we all need a mom." With a quivering voice and an earnest expression, she went on, "I've been really thinking we really all need a tremendous hug in the world now. But in our country, we need you, Kamala Harris, to be mama of the country." Now, the audience, which I can only assume was not packed with black women, broke into applause. Harris looked visibly uncomfortable as Barrymore then took her hand and pleadingly said, "We need a great protector." Now, who knows what was going through Kamala Harris's mind as she attempted to respond to this bizarre scene, but for many who understand the 500-year history of misogynoir and the strained relationships between white women and black women, the scene felt very familiar. Because black women and black motherhood are sometimes expected to hold the weight of the world, to be responsible not just for one's own physical children, but for others' children too, as well as to be a comfort and support to all white people who need them. And this is best characterised in the symbol of the mammy figure. Now, you will all recognise her, as she is often depicted as a curvy black woman, usually middle-aged, wearing an apron and speaking with a southern drawl. And she's employed by a white family. And she's there for the children's every physical and emotional need. She is also there for the parents' every physical and emotional need. She is fiercely loyal and has no thoughts for her own welfare. She is utterly devoted to the white family's service and there to make everyone else feel better. So examples include Aunt Chloe in Uncle Tom's Cabin and Hattie McDaniel in Gone with the Wind, who is literally just called Mammy. She doesn't have a name. And she's an ever-present help to Scarlett O'Hara. And in Gone with the Wind, there's no mention of Mammy's own children, whether they are dead or alive. And so in those ways, she's actually not unlike the traditional stereotype of the Victorian angel in the house, the selfless mother. But this Mammy is not the great protector of her own family. She's a martyr who lays down her life for white families. Black women do not have to have given birth to be pigeonholed into the Mammy stereotype. And as Carolyn West notes, professional status and education cannot protect black women from the Mammy image. Now, the Momala Drew Barrymore incident also was reminiscent of a similar happening more than 25 years before, when in 1998, John Gray, who wrote Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus, was a guest on Oprah Winfrey's show. And they were taking relationship advice from the questions from the audience. And West writes about what happened next. In response to an audience member's distress, he instructed Miss Winfrey, one of the world's most powerful women, to give the woman a hug. He went on to say, Oprah's going to be your mummy. She's the mother of America. That's why she didn't have time for her own kids. She's taking care of all the other lost children. Now, one of the things that I love to, I find particularly fascinating is that the mammy figure never actually existed. Because enslaved women who worked within the slave owners' houses would have been light-skinned, because that was their preference for what they wanted around them. They would have been young, and they obviously wouldn't have had enough food to become fat. Just like the myth of perfect motherhood we see in the depictions of Mary, the mammy too is a falsehood that bears little resemblance to real black womanhood or motherhood. So the mammy figure was presented as this kind of way to show, actually, slaves are happy. Like, we don't need to abolish slavery. We treat them really well. This lady, loves us. So this kind of fictitious creation of the mammy figure. To be a black mother is to exist in a state of hypervigilance, because you've given birth to children who exist in black bodies. The bodies of black girls have been sexualized, oppressed, and subjugated for centuries. The bodies of black boys have been brutalized and violated and beaten for centuries. The Black Madonna draws black women to her because she is the ultimate symbol of black motherhood, and because Mary is the ultimate symbol of a grieving mother who knows what it is like to birth a son into the world, a son who bears the scars of the world's brutality on his own body. It is Mary's proximity to suffering that has helped many oppressed groups find safety in her arms and at her feet. Now, it's been nearly 5 years, unbelievably, since the murder of George Floyd. And in this man's last moments, he called out for his mother, while police officer Derek Chauvin knelt on his neck for 9 minutes and 29 seconds. In these moments in which he was brutalized and killed slowly in broad daylight, this 46-year-old man reached for the place where he knew he could find comfort and acceptance, in the arms of his mother who had died 2 years before. Author Lene O'Neill writes of the sacred call of the sisterhood of black mothers, who have experienced the grief of the death and brutalization of their children in the face of white supremacy. Of George Floyd's final moments, she writes, "To call out to his mother is to be known to his maker, the one who gave him to her." Author and midwife Diana Spalding gives voice to the way I feel when I hear of people calling out for the comfort of their mothers in tragic moments. Of George Floyd's death, she writes, "Somewhere in the depths of his being, he believed that somehow, some way, his mother could help him in his last horrifying moments." Because isn't that ultimately what everyone believes in their core? My mother will always come. Now, there's something divine in the idea of motherhood. It can give us a glimpse into the personhood of God. But for most of Christian history, God has been reduced to some sort of cosmic sky dad. Because of the predominant theological and Christian voices that have shaped me, I have mainly imagined God to be white and male. When it came to the physical depiction of God, I couldn't help but be influenced by the centuries of artworks and the ways in which God was portrayed on film and TV. But beyond the physical white male God, as theologian Christina Cleveland describes it, represents more than just white skin, but blue eyes and blonde hair. White male God represents a symbol of brute strength and binaries and triumphalism and power. It leaves no room for the shadow side of being, no space for the fluidity and the grey and the movement, symbolising the description of the feminine spirit of God as she hovered over the waters in the creation story in Genesis. To conceive of God as male only, or even as father only, is to have an incomplete picture of who God is. And I think we miss out. I think that motherhood is a demonstration of the nature and love of God, and that God's love can helpfully be understood maternally. The first adjective used about God's character in Exodus 34:6, where God is described as compassionate. The Hebrew word used is rahum or rechamim, which is derived from the term for womb, and paints a picture of a love that envelops, that nurtures, that encircles and protects. A fierce and all-consuming love for another person that is both distinct from you and part of you. Motherhood provides a way into understanding God's love, whether we ourselves are mothers, or have simply experienced the love of a mother, or have suffered because of a lack of this mother love in our own lives. As Julian of Norwich once wrote, to the property of motherhood belong nature, love, wisdom, and knowledge, and this is God. The static stereotyping of what it is to be male does a disservice to the diversity of characteristics that we find in men, and in men who are fathers, too. Fathers can be strong, yes, and they can be protective, and they can be good at fixing things and taking the bins out, but they, of course, can also be gentle and creative and loving and kind. When I tell people I no longer use male pronouns when talking about God, I'm sometimes asked, well, what about Jesus' teaching his disciples to pray the Lord's Prayer beginning with Our Father? What about all the other times in the New Testament Jesus refers to God as Father? For some, the exclusion of male pronouns for God is just a marker of woke feminist theology, rather than a considered response to theological and biblical interpretation. There are many examples of God acting in motherly ways in Scripture. God is described as a nursing mother in Isaiah 49, as comforting Israel as a mother comforts her child in Isaiah 66 and Isaiah 42, where God cries out like a woman in labour, and in Deuteronomy, where God laments how people have forgotten who bore or gave birth to them. In the New Testament, God is the woman in the parable of the lost coin, and the woman who puts leaven into the dough. And Jesus describes himself as being like a mother hen in Luke 13. Medieval mystics were able to glimpse God's maternity, and how some of the most renowned of them dared to peek behind the patriarchal curtain to see God. Julian again says, as truly as God is our Father, so truly is God our Mother. Now, here's the thing. I think we need to be a little bit cautious when we choose to say our mother instead of our father. Because we need to be careful not to fall into the trap of reinforcing stereotypes and binaries of what we think women are like and what we think men are like. However, when we choose to see God as mother too, we are choosing to reorient our understanding of who God is, to expand it, not to reduce it. And we're also alluding to something profoundly beautiful. In recent years, when I've heard my babies cry in the middle of the night, I've picked him up, stroked his head, kissed his cheek, and let his heart beat steady to the beat of mine. And the beauty of these tender moments is palpable. For me, these are signs of the essence of God breaking into our reality. Sociologist Peter Berger suggests that a mother's love for their child is one of the signals of transcendence in societies that claim to be secular. For him, this transcendence is best illustrated in a mother's words to her child: "Everything is all right."